weeks, we've been on a journey. We started something that we as your pastors really hope and pray was not just another sermon series, was not just another church program. This morning I saw the little slide that said we started this thing the second Sunday of January. That's a journey. May it not have been waste of time and energy and maybe even money for any one of us. We started a collective journey, I want to believe. And the thing about journeys is that the danger is not in how you started, although there's a saying that says a good start, you've already won. We made a good start. It was a one church, one conversation, one call for all of us, from the little ones right to the super seniors. Even little trees participated, and that was great. The danger of a journey is how you end it. Dion, my little son, who's not as little anymore, is very competitive. So Dion, I remember the day when, well, you know, we always felt that we first need to grow a church before we can grow kids. So we started late. So I was like a grandfather by the time my kid went to daycare. And in South Africa, they have these races for the little kids, and then comes the mummies, and then the daddies, and I was always the grandfather among them. So my little son Dion, he ran, and he's a good runner, and he ran fast. And then he came close to the finish line, and then he saw, hey, there's nobody with me. And he turned around and said, where are you? And then he made a game out of it, and he ran all the way back to the start, and of course he lost. That's the kind of danger that we can be in today. The thing about journeys is you need to finish. But a spiritual journey does not have a finish line. It's a journey. Ernest Shackleton knew something about that. I don't know if you know anything about this. I watched the movie. It's brilliant. I loved it. But he and his whole crew got trapped in the Arctic ice for 2 years and didn't plan on it. But here's the thing. After 2 years of suffering and heartache, going through almost impossible things, he immediately volunteered to go back. And the media asked him, why on earth would you want to go back to what you just endured? You survived it. And he said this, and it always stayed with me. The journey is the thing. The journey is the thing. It's not a destination. This journey that we started to follow Jesus, it does not have a destination. Even though we're finishing up this series, this campaign, we should not end with it. And we're going to start a new one next week, and it's going to be great, and I'm going to share a little bit at the end, but that does not mean that that's the next and the new thing. This is still what we should be doing each and every day. When a journey changes you, going back to where you were before is impossible. You don't graduate from it. You don't frame the certificate and move on. You don't post on Facebook, been great, what's next? The journey is what it's about, and it's supposed to move you and me. Just think about it. The disciples didn't go through a 7-week sermon series or a campaign or whatever. They did something every day, and they did it until the end of their lives. It was a journey to them. Everything we learned in the Follow campaign, every one of those 7 attributes was something that they lived. It was not a campaign to them. It's something that they lived out. And it was done by ordinary, broken, sometimes confused people long before Koker McNaughton wrote any book for us to learn from. This is not something new. As a matter of fact, we're encouraging one another to go back to something that was tried and proven over these centuries. The early church did not have a book. They didn't have a Sunday morning worship service with music and a stained glass window and screens and good sound. They didn't have a welcome team and ushers. They didn't even have a coffee cart. Imagine how boring church would have been without a coffee cart. They didn't have that. But what they had was Jesus. And they followed Jesus. They followed him so closely, so practically, so radically, that within 3 centuries, the most powerful empire on earth had been turned upside down. Normal grassroots people. People despised, people killed. The Roman philosopher, one day when you have nothing to do, read about this guy. It's crazy interesting. Pliny the Younger, he was not a Christian. Please take note. He was not a Christian. And he wrote to his emperor, his boss, his emperor, around AD 112. And essentially what he was writing is a whole book about it. He said, I don't know what to do with these Christian people. They meet before dawn. They sing to their Christ like we did this morning. They refuse to steal or lie, and they care for each other in ways that I cannot explain. They were known for their love, you know. What they had was not a church program, because church programs cannot produce that kind of lifestyle. They had Jesus. And that's exactly what we've been talking about for 7 weeks, ladies and gentlemen. A lifestyle. Living something that is the heart of Jesus. Pastor Kip mentioned it very briefly this morning, but maybe you have amnesia or something like me, or you forget stuff. Just let's run just one last lap around the arena this morning and remind ourselves what we've learned. Firstly, we spoke about to be with Jesus. And to be with Jesus, in a nutshell, is to abide. That's the word, abide. Root yourself in His presence and in His word. That should be the habit. That should be the lifestyle. I'm rooted in Jesus. And church like this is great, don't get me wrong. But it's not a replacement for that. Be with Jesus. Brother Lawrence was a 17th century monk who worked in a monastery kitchen. Now try to get the picture of a 17th century kitchen. Washing dishes, peeling vegetables, doing the most unglorious work you can imagine. But he developed what he called the practice of the presence of God. This monk peeling potatoes and stuff in a 17th century kitchen, the practice of the presence of God. And what it's about is he simply talked to Jesus all day long. Simply out loud, having a conversation with Jesus, waiting for the responses to come. And here's the thing. He wrote a little book about his experiences. 350 years later, that book is still in print. Why? Because we were designed for this practice of presence with God. That should be our normal as a follower of Jesus. John Wesley, basically the biggest influencer of where we theologically stand. He rode over 250,000 miles on a horseback across England preaching the gospel. But what many people don't realize is that amount of miles was the amount of hours that he prayed. And that's not the only amount of hours that he prayed. He was also praying before and after. he got onto the horseback. He said, I have so much to do that I must spend several hours in prayer before I'm able to do these things that I need to do. So, more to do equals more time with Jesus, not less. I know that's counterintuitive, but that's discipleship. That's being a real follower of Jesus. Abide. Stay close. The second thing that we spoke about is to listen. Listen to Jesus. And that is something that we're not good at. We're not even good at listening to one another, in any case. Imagine have to listen to somebody that you cannot necessarily see. Growing attentive to his voice, because he's always speaking. Attentive to his voice through obedience to his word. Here's a man who listened when it cost him his everything. His name is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German, 1930s. Hitler is on the rise, and the German church largely just went along with it. They simply had no issue stamping the swastika on their church bulletins, and they just went along with what was happening in the country. And then Bonhoeffer, a young, brilliant theologian, hears the voice of Jesus clearly saying, this is wrong. Stand up. And like probably most of us, when something this audacious is asked of you, he ran away for a while, but God's voice didn't become still. It became louder, and he came back. He said, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act. He listened to God, how hard it was. He acted, he obeyed, and he was hanged by the Nazis in April 1945, just 3 weeks before the war ended. That's not success through a worldly lens, is it? Well, there you have it. Are we living for a human audience or for a godly, eternal audience? That was success in his life. He didn't get a happy ending by the world standards, but he listened to Jesus. And the thing is that his voice is still shaping us, still shaping the church of Jesus all across the world, still today. Listening isn't always comfortable, but it's always right. We need to grow an attentive instinct to his voice. The third thing we spoke about was healing. Not just being healed by God, wholeness, that whole conversation we had, but helping people, joining Jesus in bringing spiritual and emotional wholeness to those around us. You ever heard of Amy Carmichael? A small Irish lady who went to India in 1895, and she stayed there for 55 years, never once returning home for a furlough. She stayed there. What did she do for those 55 years? Well, she rescued children from temple prostitution. That's a thing. Temple prostitution. Children that nobody wanted, because it's sort of religious bad children. She rescued those. Children that nobody wanted to touch. She built a home for them. She built a community for them. They were a family. In the last parts of her life, she became chronically ill for 20 years. And lying on her back, she wrote books that are still being read today. One of the things that she wrote was, you can give without loving, but you cannot love without giving. God so loved the world that he, and that's why one of the 5 things that we as Aurora do is we give towards needs, because that's how we become more like Jesus. We give. Here it is again. She was present. She brought the wholeness of Jesus into the darkest corners of a very evil situation. Healing doesn't always look like a miracle campaign with people, getting anointed and all of that. It could really just be us present in a room. Number 4 was influence. We spoke about influencing like Jesus, impacting people through everyday relationships. I told you a little bit of the story. D.L. Moody was a shoe salesman in Boston. No formal education, no theological degree, and apparently he spoke with worse grammar than even I am speaking today. His whole life, apparently, he had bad grammar. Someone once criticized him publicly for his methods of reaching people for Jesus. And he said, well, I like my way of doing it better than your way of not doing it. He went on to preach to an estimated, no education, bad grammar. He spoke to almost 100 million people in his lifetime. Without a microphone, before radio, before the internet, God used this man because he was tuned in. But before D.L. Moody, and I shared this little story with you, there was a Sunday school teacher who cared about a boy called D.L. Moody with no education, bad grammar, so much that he went into the shoe store where D.L. Moody was working. And in that room, one man had one conversation in a shoe store. And D.L. Moody started following Jesus because of Edward Kimball. That's how we have influence, by being present in everyday relationships. That's the follow book in one story. We read that influence is not about having a platform, it's about being present with Jesus, of course. This Kimball person was a Sunday school teacher, didn't have a platform, didn't have a big ministry, but Kimball influenced one man, and Moody spoke to 100 million people. Number 5, we spoke about love, loving like Jesus. I remember that Sunday I said there's lots and lots of love around these days. We love a lot of things. It's different to love like Jesus. William Wilberforce spent 46 years in the British Parliament fighting to abolish the slave trade. Think about that. 46 years. He was mocked. He was threatened. He was called a fanatic, a lunatic. He was told that he was wasting his life on something that will never change. But he pressed on because of this simple conviction. God so loved the world and everybody in it that he gave his life for them. Every human being bears the image of God, and therefore every human being deserves dignity. And yes, somehow it's in the political arena, and we somehow have to decide, are we on this side or that side or the other side? I don't know. For Jesus, it was just common sense. We need to love people because they were created in the image. That is where this man came from. He famously said that God Almighty has set before me just 2 great objectives: the suppression of the slave trade and the reformation of manners, meaning the moral renewal of his society. He saw the abolition of the slave trade 3 days before his death. God was faithful. So love doesn't give up. Love does not quit. Love keeps showing up even when the results take decades. Now you can go read 1 Corinthians 13. It's not meant to be read at weddings. It's meant to be read by the Church of Jesus Christ. Love. The 6th week, we spent the whole week talking about how to pray like Jesus. Deepening dependence on God through communion. And I said not what we're going to do today, communion, but proximity to Him and intercession. My German friend Martin Luther, I knelt exactly where he wrote the Bible. Well, where he translated the Bible. The Germans think he wrote the Bible, but actually just translated it. Correction. He sparked the Reformation. And he stood before the emperors and said, "Here I stand, I can do no other." This was the core of his prayer life, my friends. In his prayer time. And that's why I said I knelt there, because there was a place where he prayed and then he worked. He prayed and then he worked. He translated the entire Bible into German while hiding in a castle, essentially under a death sentence. And he prayed constantly. His famous quote, "I have so much to do today that I shall spend the first 3 hours in prayer." Rings a bell? John Wesley, he learned it from Martin Luther so many years before. Maybe God is trying to tell us something about the importance of prayer again. John Bunyan wrote The Pilgrim's Progress. Who of you have read this book, Pilgrim's Progress? 10, 12? Well, he wrote this book in a prison cell, imprisoned for preaching without a license. It still happens in many countries today. You need a license to preach, and the license says you should only preach about this stuff and not speak bad about the government, etc. He had every reason to be bitter and broken and silent. Instead, he prayed. He prayed for his oppressors. And out of his praying, he wrote. And The Pilgrim's Progress became the second most published book in history, only after the Bible. Your prison cell, whatever it might look like this morning, does not have to be the end of your story. It might just be the beginning of it. Think of Joseph and so many others. And last week, we spoke about stewarding our lives faithfully under the lordship of Jesus. We called it managing like Jesus. Some of you might know this, but Billy Graham, arguably the most influential evangelist of the 20th century, preached to over 200 million people in person. He advised at least 12 American presidents. But what is less known about him is what is called the Modesto Manifesto. And it was drawn up in the beginning days of his ministry, before the stadiums, before the fame. He sat down with his closest colleagues and said, "We are going to decide today, how are we going to conduct ourselves? How are we going to handle our money? How are we going to handle sexuality? How are we going to handle integrity?" And of course, he had a plan to stay humble and live in humility before the temptation ever arrives. Proactively, they decided, this is who we are and this is how we're going to live. And it's been in the secular media about how John Wesley would simply not get into a vehicle with only a female. He traveled with different male companions always to ensure that he sticks to the Modesto Manifesto. While many, many others fell, he stood and he held. Stewardship is not just about money, Pastor Laurie said last week. It's about managing our whole lives, all of our lives. Your time, your body, your relationships, your reputation as someone who belongs to Jesus. So that's in a nutshell what we spoke about. Hours reading, listening, contemplating, meditating on all of this. And now, at the end of this, I want to I want to say something. It's easy to listen to the stories of Bonhoeffer and Billy Graham and all these guys, Wilberforce, and say, wow, God, I want to be like that. We're good at admiring people, find inspiration, but then do what Dion did, my son. Walk out the door and say, right, this is a nice party, and just go back to where we started. We cannot do that. The early church, they kept going. Every day, one decision at a time. The journey is the thing. It's in listening. It's in abiding. It's in influencing, where you have the adventure of life. You never know what's the next thing. Yesterday morning, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Chicago with a new friend of mine, Pastor Anderson. And he shared about this guy. I'm not going to mention his name, but he was one of the 5 mafia bosses that ran all the cartels in Chicago. And the other guys let him out of it. He's getting old. So one Sunday, he came walking into their church facility, but stood at the door, all tattooed and. And afterwards, Pastor went out and he said, why didn't you come in? He said, oh no, this is not my scene. Long story short, they started having conversations. And this guy, having no idea what Christianity is all about, is getting more and more excited about Jesus. The adventure of, can you imagine the day that this guy is going to start following Jesus? The stories. And Pastor was just doing his thing on a regular Sunday. People outside were just welcoming and handing him water and coffee like every other person every week. It's in the journey that we need to find our joy, my friends. Keep going. Bonhoeffer didn't just wake up one morning and decided to be a martyr. He just kept choosing Jesus in the small things. He kept going in the small things that was important to Jesus. Moody didn't decide to preach to millions. It wasn't a career opportunity and he chased it. God did it for him when he was just faithful in his little storefront selling shoes. Wilberforce didn't win in 1 year and said, well, now I had my election campaign, what's the next thing? Or in 10 years' time. But 46 years he kept showing up because God called him into it. That's the call. It's not a dramatic decision once. It's daily, thousands of little decisions following Jesus. 7 things. Not just once or talking about it for a week, but daily for life. So, Bonhoeffer clearly kept going. Wilberforce kept going for 46 years. Moody kept going. He had health issues at some stage. From the storefront to the nations, he just kept doing what he's always done, loving Jesus. Now it's our turn. Now it's your turn. And I really pray that you will not just close the book, hang up your walking shoes, but that you will choose to keep walking, whatever this journey might look like. Jesus is still ahead of you. Even King David said, Paul said, don't look back because the best is still coming in front of you. You need to keep walking. I want to close with God's instruction through the Apostle Paul, and then I'm done. He said, let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. Let's just look at that verse. Let us. Who's writing this thing? Galatians was written by Paul. Paul is including himself. The great apostle felt the temptation to grow weary in his love and in his walk with Jesus. It's normal. Even the great apostle Paul felt it. But he spoke to himself as he's speaking to us. Let's not give in to that temptation. The next one is grow weary. Bible scholars who are way more clever than I am, they said that Paul is specifically acknowledging the discipleship fatigue in this. Growing weary, meaning slowly finding reasons to stop doing the little things. Do not get to that point. Find ways and means to find joy in doing the things that you can keep doing it. Find accountability partners to kick your butt and make sure that we keep doing this because it's important. Why? Because doing, do you see the word doing? It's a present participle. It means a continuous, a patterned way of life. Let us not grow weary. It's not just, it's slowly growing into weariness, fatigue of doing, keep doing a patterned lifestyle. Keep doing what? Good. Go read Galatians 6 verse 1 through 10. You'll see the 10 ways we can do good, how we can live a good life. Basically, in a nutshell, a Holy Spirit driven life with the fruit of the Spirit flowing out of it. And then it goes to in due season. Like with every season, you harvest what you sowed. My friends, I can understand that thousands of people say this Christian thing is not working because they haven't put anything into it. That's why let's not go there today, but unless you invest in any relationship, there's not going to be joy in that relationship, right? Those that's been married for 50 years, ask them. The sowing produces the reaping. You need to put something in to get something out. But the thing with seed is you always get a bigger harvest, a much bigger harvest than what you sowed. One seed produces a whole harvest, and it will be worth the effort. Throughout the seasons, don't stop. Keep moving. The journey is the thing. Will you keep going? 7 things. Daily, non-stop. Let's pray.